an HOA president, found a little diabetic girl alone on a bench, trembling and desperately sick. Instead of helping her, she grabbed the child's arm and dragged her to the gate. The little girl begged for her insulin, crying that she was sick and needed help. But this woman just pushed her outside into the scorching summer heat and locked the gate behind her, leaving her there to suffer. Then an ambulance arrived, and everything changed forever. Before you watch this full story, comment below and let me know which country you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories like this one. The July sun beat down mercilessly on the sidewalk outside Riverside Meadows, its intense heat shimmering in waves that made the very air itself seem to ripple and dance. 8-year-old Emma sat crumpled against the locked iron gate of the HOA community, her small body trembling and shaking despite the oppressive warmth pressing down on her. Sweat poured down her pale face in rivers. But it wasn't just from the 100-degree heat. Her hand shook uncontrollably as she fumbled with her medical alert bracelet, trying desperately to focus on the engraved words that were starting to blur before her eyes. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, her voice barely audible and weak. "I need my insulin. Please, somebody help me." Inside the gated community, Karen Patterson stood with her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her thin lips pressed into a satisfied, almost smug line. The HOA president wore her authority like a suit of armor, her pearl necklace catching the bright sunlight as she deliberately refused to even glance at the crying child beyond the locked gate. "Rules are rules," Karen announced loudly to the small crowd of neighbors who had gathered around her. "No unauthorized children in the community pool area, period." She broke protocol, plain and simple. "But Karen, she's just a little girl," Mrs. Chen said softly, clutching her gardening gloves nervously, "and she looks terribly unwell." "Look at her. That's not my concern," Karen said coldly. Her mother should have filled out the proper paperwork. Form 14B, subsection 3, clearly states that all minor guests must be pre-approved 72 hours in advance, no exceptions. Karen adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses, effectively ending the conversation, as if the matter was completely settled. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand in her rigid world of rules and regulations, was that Emma wasn't just any child, and her mother wasn't just any parent. This woman had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and she had no idea what was about to happen. Stay with me. This story will absolutely shock you. 40 minutes earlier, Emma had been laughing and playing. She'd been staying with her grandmother, Rose, who lived in the Riverside Meadows community, while her mother, Sarah, pulled a double shift at the hospital where she worked. Sarah Martinez was a decorated paramedic with 15 years of experience, someone who had pulled countless people from the very edge of death, who had held hands with the dying and breathed life back into the living. She was a hero in every sense of the word. But today, she was trying to make ends meet, working extra hours to cover Emma's mounting medical bills. You see, Emma's type 1 diabetes was diagnosed 2 years ago, completely transforming their lives overnight in ways they never could have imagined. Every single meal became a careful calculation. Every activity required constant blood sugar monitoring and precise insulin doses. Sarah had become an absolute expert in reading the subtle signs of her daughter's condition, the tiny warning signals that something was going wrong. But Grandma Rose, despite all her love and best intentions, sometimes missed those important details. That particular morning, Emma's insulin pump had malfunctioned. The small device that usually sat clipped to her waistband, automatically delivering life-sustaining insulin throughout the day, had completely frozen. Its screen had gone blank, and no amount of button pushing could revive it. "Grandma, my pump isn't working," Emma had said at breakfast, her voice tinged with worry and concern. Rose had smiled reassuringly, not fully understanding the danger. "We'll call your mother during her break, sweetheart. In the meantime, let's have some fun together. It's so incredibly hot outside. Why don't we go to the community pool and cool off?" Emma had hesitated for a moment. She knew the routine by heart. Check blood sugar. Calculate insulin. Inject, if needed. But Grandma Rose had seemed so excited about the pool, and the thought of that cool, refreshing water was just too tempting for an 8-year-old on a blazing summer day. She'd nodded, pushing away the nagging feeling deep inside that something wasn't quite right. They'd packed towels, sunscreen, and Emma's emergency glucose tablets, the little candies that could raise her blood sugar quickly if it dropped too low. What they'd forgotten in all the rush and heat and excitement was the backup insulin pen that usually lived in Emma's medical emergency bag. That one forgotten item would nearly cost Emma her life. At the community pool, Emma had felt it starting, those familiar warning signs her body had learned to recognize over the past 2 years. The excessive thirst that no amount of water could satisfy. The slight tremor in her hands made them shake. The way sound seemed too loud, and lights seemed too bright, like everything was turned up to maximum volume. "Grandma," she'd said, tugging urgently at Rose's sleeve, "I don't feel good at all. I think my sugar is really high." Rose had immediately checked Emma's blood sugar meter, her hands moving quickly. The number that appeared on the small screen had made her heart stop completely. Dangerously, terrifyingly high. Without insulin, without that absolutely crucial hormone to help her body process glucose, Emma's blood was essentially turning toxic. Her body was slowly poisoning itself. "We need to go home, right this second," Rose had said, trying desperately to keep the rising panic out of her voice. "We need to get your insulin right now." They had no idea that getting home would become impossible. They had no idea that the HOA president was about to turn a medical emergency into a life-threatening nightmare. What happens next is almost impossible to believe. They'd rushed toward the gate, Emma's steps already becoming unsteady and uncertain. But that's exactly when Karen Patterson had appeared, clipboard in hand, like a guard dog who'd just spotted an intruder on her territory. "Excuse me," Karen had called out sharply, her voice cutting through the air. "May I see your guest authorization form?" Rose had turned, confusion and fear warring on her face. "Karen, this is my granddaughter. She's staying with me this week, just like she does every summer. I don't see her name on the approved guest list for today's date," Karen had said, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured fingernail. "Pool access requires prior approval." "You know the rules, Rose. This is an emergency," Rose had said, her voice rising with desperation. "She's sick and needs her medication right now. We need to get to my house." "Then perhaps you should have been more prepared," Karen had said coldly. "Rules exist for everyone's safety, Rose. If I make an exception for you, I'll have to make exceptions for everyone. Where does it end?" "My granddaughter has diabetes, Karen," Rose had pleaded. "She needs insulin now, not in 10 minutes, now." But Karen had already turned away, speaking into her radio with authority. "Security, this is Karen. We have an unauthorized minor in the pool area. Please escort them to the exit immediately and ensure they understand proper guest protocols for any future visits." The security guard, a young man named Tom, who'd only been working at Riverside Meadows for 2 weeks, had approached them apologetically. He'd clearly seen Emma's pale face, noticed the way she was swaying slightly on her feet, but his brand new job was on the line. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he'd said to Rose, genuine regret in his voice. "I need to escort you both out. Those are my orders, but my house is just right there." Rose had pointed frantically. "We can see it from here. Please." "Community rules, ma'am," Tom had said quietly, looking uncomfortable. "You'll need to exit through the main gate and re-enter properly with the correct authorization." The main gate was a full 10-minute walk from the pool, in the complete opposite direction from Rose's house. In this scorching, brutal heat, with a desperately sick child, it might as well have been 10 miles away. They'd started walking, Rose supporting Emma as best she could, the little girl growing noticeably weaker with every step. Halfway to the distant gate, Emma had stumbled badly, nearly falling. "Grandma, I can't," she'd gasped. "I feel really, really sick." Rose had looked around desperately, searching for help, For anyone who might understand, they were in a section of the community with no houses nearby, just carefully landscaped areas, and the tall privacy wall that surrounded everything. No one was around to help them. "Can we sit down, just for a minute?" Emma's voice had been small and frightened, so different from her usually cheerful tone. They'd made it to a shaded bench when Emma's blood sugar monitor had suddenly alarmed, its shrill beeping filling the air. Rose's hands had shaken violently as she checked the reading, rising fast, getting worse by the minute. Emma's blood sugar was climbing 2 levels that could cause seizures, coma, or death. Her grandmother was about to make a desperate decision that would leave Emma completely alone, and the HOA president. She was about to do something so cruel, so unthinkable, that it would shock an entire nation. "Keep watching, you won't believe what she does." That's when Emma had started crying, not from physical pain exactly, but from that overwhelming feeling of wrongness that dangerously high blood sugar brought. It felt like her entire body was betraying her, like something was terribly, desperately wrong inside. And she was too young to understand it all fully, but old enough to be absolutely terrified. "Grandma, am I going to die?" she'd asked, her voice breaking. "No, baby, no," Rose had said, though terror was written all over her face. "We're going to get you your medicine. Can you walk just a little bit more?" But Emma had tried to stand and immediately sat back down, the world spinning around her. "I'm too dizzy. Everything's spinning." Rose had made a terrible, impossible decision. "Stay right here, sweetheart. I'm going to run to my house and get your insulin. I'll be right back. So fast. I promise. Don't leave me," Emma had whispered, real fear making her voice crack and shake. "Please, don't leave me alone. I have to, baby. But I'll be so fast, you won't even notice I'm gone." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Rose had absolutely no choice left. She'd settled Emma in the shade, given her water, and then run as fast as her 68-year-old legs could carry her, her heart pounding, praying the entire way. Karen Patterson had been doing her usual afternoon rounds, inspecting the community with her eagle eyes, when she'd spotted Emma sitting alone on the bench. A child, completely unaccompanied, direct violation of Community Rule 7.3, no unattended minors in common areas. She'd marched over, her sensible heels clicking sharply against the hot pavement with each determined step. "Young lady, where is your guardian?" Karen had demanded. Emma had looked up, her eyes unfocused and glassy. "My grandma. She went to get my medicine. Please, I'm really sick. She left you here alone." Karen's voice had been sharp with disapproval. "That's completely unacceptable and irresponsible." Karen had pulled out her phone. "What's your grandmother's name?" "Rose Martinez. Please, I'm really, really sick. I need—" "What you need," Karen had interrupted coldly, "is to learn that rules exist for a reason. Come with me right now." Karen had reached down and grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her roughly to her feet. The child had swayed dangerously, and even Karen had noticed something seemed off, but she'd attributed it to childhood dramatics and attention-seeking. "I'm taking you to the security office," Karen had announced. "Your grandmother can collect you there after I've properly documented this serious violation. But I need my insulin," Emma had tried to explain, tears streaming down her flushed face. "I have diabetes. My blood sugar is too high. I could get really sick if I don't. That's not my problem." Karen had cut her off. "Your grandmother should have been more responsible. She shouldn't have left you alone." Karen was about to do the unthinkable. She was about to leave a dying child locked outside in the 100-degree heat, and she was going to walk away without a second thought. "What happens in the next few minutes will make your blood boil. Stay with me." Karen had walked Emma all the way to the main gate, lecturing her the entire way about responsibility and following community rules and respecting authority. When they'd reached the gate, instead of taking Emma to the security office inside the community, as she'd said, Karen had pushed the child outside onto the public sidewalk. Wait, right here, Karen had ordered. I'm going to call your grandmother and inform her of her violation. She can come collect you, but you can't lock me out, Emma had protested weakly, her voice barely above a whisper now. My grandma doesn't have her phone with her. She's inside the community looking for me. Please don't leave me out here. Then she'll find you here eventually, Karen had said, with cold finality. Maybe this will teach both of you a very important lesson about respecting community guidelines and following proper procedures. With that, Karen had closed the heavy iron gate. The electronic lock had clicked into place with a sound of finality. Emma had stared through the bars, watching this woman, this adult, who was supposed to help children walk away, and she'd felt true, genuine fear for the first time in her young life. The brutal sun beat down relentlessly. The heat radiating up from the concrete sidewalk seemed to press against her skin like a physical force. Emma had sunk slowly to the ground, her back against the locked gate, and tried desperately to remember what her mother had taught her about staying calm during a medical emergency. But it was so hard to stay calm when the entire world was starting to spin wildly, when her mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton, when her heart was racing so fast it actually hurt in her chest. She'd thought about her mother. Sarah would know exactly what to do. Sarah always knew what to do. She was a hero who saved people every single day. Emma didn't know that her mother was at that exact moment loading a patient into her ambulance, working hard to save someone else's life, completely unaware that her own daughter was dying just a few miles away. Inside the community, Rose had been absolutely frantic. She'd returned to the bench with the precious insulin pen clutched in her shaking hands, only to find Emma gone, vanished. She'd called Emma's name over and over, her voice growing more desperate with each cry. She'd searched all the nearby paths, checked behind bushes, and looked everywhere her granddaughter might have gone. Finally, she'd approached a neighbor who was watering her flowers. Have you seen a little girl? 8 years old, brown hair, pink swimsuit. Please, have you seen her? Oh yes, the neighbor had said casually. Karen took her to the gate about 20 minutes ago. Something about a rule violation, I think. Rose's blood had run absolutely cold. 20 minutes. Emma had been without insulin for 20 minutes, on top of everything else. She'd sprinted toward the main gate, her mind filled with terrifying images of Emma alone and sick and scared. When she'd reached the gate, her worst nightmare had come true. Her granddaughter was curled up on the ground outside the locked gate, barely conscious, her lips taking on a dangerous bluish tint. Emma, Rose had screamed, but the gate wouldn't open for her. She'd pressed the call button frantically, over and over. Open the gate. My granddaughter needs help. Open it now. Emma was dying on the ground, locked outside like a criminal. Her grandmother had the insulin, but couldn't reach her. And then something happened that no one expected, something that would change everything and bring Karen Patterson's world crashing down around her. You have to see what happens next. Tom, the security guard, had appeared at the gate, looking confused. Ma'am, you need to calm down and open this gate right now, Rose had screamed. I need to verify my granddaughter is having a medical emergency. Rose had shouted. Open the damn gate this second. Tom had finally looked past Rose and seen Emma through the bar, seen her glassy, unfocused eyes and shallow, rapid breathing, and had finally acted. He'd overridden the electronic lock, and the gate had swung open. Rose had rushed through and dropped to her knees beside Emma. Her granddaughter was barely responsive, her skin clammy and pale. Emma, baby, can you hear me? Rose had asked, pulling out the insulin pen with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold it. Emma's eyes had fluttered open slightly. Mom, she'd whispered, confused and disoriented. No, baby, it's Grandma. Your mom's at work, but I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you your insulin right now. Rose had dialed the pen to what she desperately hoped was the right dose, her hands trembling so violently she could barely see the numbers. She'd never actually administered insulin before. Sarah always did it. Rose had only watched, She'd pulled up Emma's shirt, trying to remember the exact technique. The abdomen. Sarah always used the abdomen. Or was it the thigh? She couldn't remember. Why couldn't she remember? "Ma'am, please," Emma had said weakly, trying to pull away. "Don, single quotes. TRD, it's okay, sweetheart," Rose had said, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay. Just a little pinch. I promise it'll help you feel better." That's when Karen had reappeared, irritation written clearly all over her face. "Rose, what is all this commotion about? You're disturbing the other residents. This is completely inappropriate." Rose had looked up, and for the first time in her entire life, she'd understood what people meant when they said they saw red. "You locked my granddaughter outside," Rose had said, her voice shaking with fury. "She has diabetes. She could have died out here. She still might die." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Karen had said dismissively. "She's perfectly fine. Look at her." "Fine." Rose's voice had cracked. "Look at her. Really, look at her. She's not fine." Several neighbors had gathered now, drawn by all the shouting and commotion. Mrs. Chen had gasped audibly when she'd seen Emma's condition. Mr. Patel had immediately pulled out his cell phone. "Someone call 911 right now," he'd said firmly, already dialing. "We need an ambulance here immediately." "That's hardly necessary," Karen had protested, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "You're all completely overreacting to this situation." But Mr. Patel was already speaking urgently to the emergency dispatcher. "Yes, we need an ambulance right away. 8-year-old girl, diabetic emergency. She's barely conscious, and her breathing is shallow. Please, hurry." Karen had paled slightly, reality starting to sink in. "Now wait just a minute here. I was simply enforcing community rules, as I'm required to do. If anyone is at fault here, it's Rose for leaving her granddaughter completely unattended. You locked a sick child outside in 100-degree heat," Mrs. Chen had said quietly, but her voice was filled with disgust. "How could you possibly do something like that?" "I didn't know she was sick," Karen had said defensively. "How was I supposed to know?" "She told you she was sick," Mrs. Chen had said, her voice rising. "I heard her myself. She told you she needed insulin." We all heard her. Karen had looked around at the circle of neighbors, and for the first time, she'd seen that not a single face held any sympathy for her. Only anger, shock, and complete disgust. "I want everyone to disperse immediately," she'd said, trying desperately to regain control of the situation. "This is a private matter between Rose and myself." "No," Mr. Patel had said, his voice firm. "It's not private. Not anymore." The ambulance was coming, but would it arrive in time? And when it did, when the paramedics stepped out of that ambulance, everyone, especially Karen, was about to get the shock of their lives. The twist that comes next is something nobody saw coming. The sound of sirens had cut through the hot afternoon air, growing louder and closer with each passing second. The ambulance was almost there. Rose had finally managed to administer the insulin, though her shaking hands had caused her to waste almost half the precious dose. She'd cradled Emma against her chest, rocking her gently back and forth like she was a baby again. "Help is coming, sweetheart," Rose had whispered. "Help is coming. Just hold on for me. Please hold on." Emma's eyes had closed again. Her breathing had become even more shallow and rapid. Rose had felt for her pulse. It was fast and weak, fluttering like a tiny bird's. The ambulance had pulled up right to the gate, its lights flashing red and blue. 2 paramedics had jumped out quickly, one of them reaching for their equipment bag. Rose's heart had completely stopped when she'd recognized one of the paramedics. Sarah Martinez had been reaching for her medical equipment, running through protocols in her head, when she'd seen the crowd gathered at the gate, when she'd seen her elderly mother holding a small child in a pink swimsuit, when her brain had finally processed that the child, that sick, barely conscious child, was Emma. For one terrible, frozen moment, Sarah had stood there. Every instinct she'd carefully honed over 15 years as a paramedic. Every emergency protocol, every trauma response she'd trained for, had just disappeared completely, replaced by the absolute primal terror of a mother seeing her child in mortal danger. Then her training had kicked back in like a switch being flipped. Emma. Sarah had raced forward, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. Her hands had moved automatically, checking pulse, checking pupils, checking breathing, all the things she'd done 1,000 times before, but never, ever on her own child. "Baby, can you hear me? It's Mom. I'm here now. Mommy's here." Emma's eyes had opened just slightly. "Mom," she'd whispered weakly. "I'm sorry, my pump broke and Grandma tried to help, but the lady wouldn't let us go home, and baby, save your strength," Sarah had said, her voice steady and professional, even as tears streamed down her face. "I've got you now. You're going to be okay. I promise, you're going to be okay." Sarah's partner, Marcus, had been quickly setting up their medical kit. "What's her blood sugar?" he'd asked. Rose had checked the meter with trembling hands. 418. Sarah had closed her eyes briefly. Dangerously high, critically high, but she'd handled worse situations than this. She'd handled much worse. This was her daughter, yes. But she was also a patient. And Sarah knew exactly how to save patients. It's what she did. It's who she was. "Starting an IV," she'd announced, her voice calm and controlled. Marcus prepped the fluids. Her hands hadn't shaken, not once, not even slightly. They'd never shaken in 15 years on the job, and they wouldn't start now, not when Emma needed her to be strong. She'd found the vein in Emma's small arm with practiced precision, inserted the needle smoothly, taped it down securely, and hooked up the 4 fluids. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm giving you some medicine to help bring your sugar down," Sarah had explained gently. "You're going to start feeling better very soon. I promise." "It hurts, Mom," Emma had whimpered. "I know, baby. I know it does. But you're being so incredibly brave." That's when Sarah had looked up and seen Karen Patterson standing nearby, watching everything with a mixture of concern and defensiveness on her face. "What happened here?" Sarah had asked, her voice still controlled, still professional. Rose had started to explain, but Mrs. Chen had interrupted, her voice shaking with emotion. "That woman locked Emma outside the gate. The child told her clearly that she was diabetic and needed insulin, but she didn't care at all. She just walked away and left her there." Sarah's hands had stilled for just a moment. She'd looked at Karen, really looked at her, and something in Sarah's expression had made Karen actually take a step backward. "You did what?" Sarah had asked quietly. "Now see here," Karen had said defensively. "I was simply enforcing community rules, as I'm authorized and required to do." "My daughter told you she was having a medical emergency," Sarah had said, her voice still quiet, but with steel underneath. "And you locked her outside in 100-degree heat." "I didn't know it was serious," Karen had protested. "She looked perfectly fine to me. Children exaggerate all the time." Sarah had stood up slowly, and Marcus had quickly moved to take over Emma's care. He'd recognized the look on his partner's face. He'd seen Sarah talk down armed suspects, comfort grieving families, and maintain her composure in the most absolutely horrific emergencies imaginable. But he'd never seen her look like this. Sarah was about to unleash 15 years of experience and fury on this HOA president. Karen had no idea who she'd just messed with. What Sarah says next will give you chills. Stay with me. This confrontation is powerful. She looked fine, Sarah had repeated slowly, her voice deadly quiet. My 8-year-old daughter told you she was diabetic and needed insulin, and you thought she looked fine. I assumed she was exaggerating, Karen had said, but her voice was less certain now. Children do that constantly. Children do that, Sarah had said, each word measured. Do you have any idea at all what happens when a diabetic doesn't get insulin? Do you have even the slightest clue what you almost did to my child? The crowd had grown even larger now. More neighbors, people from surrounding houses, and even some people passing by, had stopped to watch this unfold. High blood sugar isn't immediately dangerous, Karen had said defensively, grasping at straws. I've read about diabetes online. It's low blood sugar, that's the real emergency. Sarah had actually laughed, but there was absolutely no humor in the sound. You've read about it. You've read about it online. So you thought you knew better than my daughter, better than my mother, better than a sick child who was desperately telling you she needed help. I was doing my job, Karen had insisted. Your job. Sarah's voice had finally risen. Your job is to protect the residents of this community. Emma is a resident here. She stays here every single summer. She's been coming here since she was 3 years old. She's not on the permanent resident list, Karen had said stubbornly. She's 8 years old. Sarah had shouted. She's a child, a sick child, and you locked her outside like she was a stray dog that wandered in. Marcus had placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah, Emma needs you. Stay focused on her. Sarah had taken a deep, shuddering breath, forcing herself back into professional mode. She'd returned to her daughter's side, checked her vitals one more time, and nodded to Marcus. We need to transport immediately, she'd said. Her blood sugar is starting to come down, but she needs to be monitored closely at the hospital. They'd carefully loaded Emma onto the stretcher, securing her safely. Rose had climbed into the ambulance, still crying, still shaking. Sarah had been about to follow when she'd turned back to Karen one final time. This isn't over, she'd said, her voice calm again, but filled with absolute promise. What you did today, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. At the hospital, Emma had been stabilized within a few hours. Her blood sugar had been carefully brought back down to a normal, safe range. The doctors had kept her overnight for close observation, checking carefully for diabetic ketoacidosis, that dangerous condition where the body starts breaking down fat for fuel because it can't process sugar properly. Thankfully, Rose's insulin injection, though poorly administered and only a partial dose, had been just enough to prevent that worst-case scenario. Emma had been lucky, so incredibly lucky. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about how unlucky they'd been in the first place. How different things could have ended. How close they'd come to losing everything. She'd sat beside Emma's hospital bed for hours, holding her daughter's small hand, watching her sleep peacefully. Emma looked so tiny in that big hospital bed, so vulnerable with the IV line in her arm and all the monitoring equipment beeping softly around her. I'm so sorry, baby, Sarah had whispered. I should have been there. I should have protected you better. Emma's eyes had opened. Mom, I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. Are you mad at me? Emma had asked in a small voice. I forgot to check my pump at breakfast, and I forgot to bring my backup insulin to the pool. Sarah's heart had absolutely broken. Mad at you, baby. No. None of this, not one single bit of this, is your fault. You're 8 years old. You're managing a disease that most adults couldn't handle. I'm so proud of you. But if you'd remembered everything perfectly, Sarah had interrupted gently, that woman still would have locked you out. If you'd done absolutely everything right, she still would have treated you like you didn't matter. This isn't about what you did or didn't do. This is about an adult who valued her precious rules more than a child's life. She was really mean, Mom, Emma had said quietly. I know, baby, I know, she was. I was scared. I was really, really scared. Sarah had carefully climbed onto the hospital bed, gathering her daughter into her arms. Of course you were scared. I would have been scared too, but you know what? You were also brave. Even when you were scared. Even you get scared, Emma had asked. But you're brave. You save people all the time. Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared, Sarah had explained. It means you keep going even when you are scared. And you did that today. You stayed as calm as you could. You told people what you needed. You didn't give up. That's real courage, Emma. That's real bravery. Emma had snuggled closer. Will you stay with me? Forever, baby. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. Emma was safe, but Sarah's fight was beginning. She was about to launch a legal battle that would make national headlines and change HOA laws forever. What happens next will restore your faith in justice. Keep watching, you need to see how this ends. 3 days later, Sarah had stood in her lawyer's office, reviewing the case with fierce determination. We're filing charges of child endangerment and criminal negligence, Attorney Jennifer Walsh had explained carefully. We're also pursuing a civil lawsuit against the HOA itself for significant damages. What are our chances? Sarah had asked. Excellent. Very excellent, actually, Jennifer had said confidently. We have multiple witnesses who heard Emma clearly state she was diabetic and needed insulin. We have security footage showing Karen Patterson physically escorting Emma outside the gate. And most importantly, we have Emma's medical records documenting the absolute severity of her condition. The security footage, Sarah had leaned forward. I want to see it. I need to see exactly what happened. Jennifer had hesitated. Sarah, I really don't think that's a good idea. Watching your child in distress like that. I need to see it, Sarah had insisted firmly. I need to know exactly what happened to my daughter. The footage had been even worse than Sarah had imagined. Watching Karen grab Emma's arm, watching her daughter try desperately to explain, try so hard to make this adult understand. Seeing Emma's legs buckle slightly, seeing her sway on her feet, and watching Karen attribute it all to dramatics. Watching Karen push Emma through that gate and walk away as Emma sank to the ground. Sarah had watched the entire thing in complete silence. When it ended, she'd looked at Jennifer with absolute steel in her eyes. I want this woman to face the full consequences of what she did, Sarah had said. Full consequences. No plea deals. No reduced charges whatsoever. She left my daughter to die because she cared more about her authority than about a child's life. We'll do everything we possibly can, Jennifer had promised. The case had made national headlines within days. HOA president faces charges after locking diabetic child outside in extreme heat. Read the news stories everywhere. The story had spread like wildfire through social media, picked up by national news outlets, and sparked an intense debate about HOA power and accountability. The trial had been just as difficult as Jennifer had warned. Karen's expensive defense team had painted Rose as a negligent guardian who,